Welcome to Life's Dirty Little Secrets. I'm Emma Waddington.
And I'm Chris McCurry. And today we are delighted, pleased, thrilled. We can add more words to this. We like to have Dr. Kerry Makin-Byrd with us today. And she is a clinical psychologist, author, and trainer based in New Zealand. And she is originally from Pennsylvania, having received her PhD in psychology from Penn State University. She's the author of 2 books, Ballad of Burnout, A Helper Lost and Found, published in 2023. It's a first-person account of professional burnout, written in verse and prose across 12 chapters that run as one continuous ballad. And her new book, Start Here, Practical Guide for the Overwhelmed, was published by Little and Brown just this last November, 2025. She spent the first chapter of her career as a national expert on trauma at the United States Veterans Health Administration, New York University, the National Center for PTSD, and Stanford. She's authored congressional reports and published over 30 peer-reviewed articles and has trained hundreds of clinicians across the country and now across the world. Her second career was as a clinical psychologist dedicated to treating burnout and trauma, providing therapy, coaching, and clinical supervision to patients and professionals. And she has experienced burnout and being overwhelmed herself twice. The first time after treating chronically underserved families at the University of California, San Francisco, one of my old haunts. And then again after serving as co-founding psychologist at a venture capital-backed startup. Interesting. So much to talk about. Welcome, Dr. Makin-Byrd.
Oh, thank you for having me. I feel so appreciative of each of us on different little points across the globe right now, kind of yet all talking and being able to share some of the real nuggets that I think psychology and writing has to offer to support people.
Yeah, it is quite miraculous that we can do this in real time all over the place. Seattle, Singapore, Wellington. You're intimately familiar with burnout and being overwhelmed. So could you define being overwhelmed? How does that differ from burnout or merely being stressed or simply, being busy because you've got too many things on your to-do list?
So overwhelm, does not have any kind of clear medical or diagnostic definition, of course. And both my personal experience and I think I am not sure if you can get to this moment in time in any specific life without having a felt experience of overwhelm at some point. Typically, overwhelm includes changes in eating, sleeping, changes in mood, feeling really scattered, feel sometimes for those in the audience that have kind of a frame of the window of tolerance, sometimes when you're overwhelmed, some of us are wired such that when we feel overwhelmed, it feels as though we're running really hot. We're going fast, we're moving very quickly, but it feels unskillful or ineffective. Our brain is our thoughts are running a million miles an hour. We're trying to kind of control and move and act. And for some of us, when we're overwhelmed, it has a more cold flavor. It can feel almost like you're frozen. Things are really slowing down. It's hard to feel your body and think and feel at the same time. It is like everything is moving in syrup. So those are some of the examples of evidence of overwhelm that I frequently hear, both in my work and then, of course, just hanging out with other moms on the playground, talking about how we all experience overwhelm sometimes. And then burnout, one of the things that I think has been useful for people on the ground is expanding a definition of burnout to within the field of psychology and within the international classification of diagnoses. I think we're on version 11, the ICD-11 now. There is a highly specific definition of work burnout that typically has 3 characteristics. People are feeling incredibly exhausted and depleted. They are feeling quite distant or cynical about their job, and they also feel like they're not making an impact anymore. They're questioning, is what I'm doing useful? So that is kind of the classic trademark definitions of burnout. And what we know empirically is there are thoughtful and rich assessments of burnout. And Lori Dolan and her colleagues, I think, provided clinicians on the ground a really useful tool when they came up with a single item assessment of burnout. And the headline of her research really is people have a good sense of when they're burnout. If you ask them, they will let you know how crispy they're feeling because they have a sense of what does rested and nourished look like for them? What does kind of the yellow warning middle ground look like for them? And then people know when they're at a kind of red level, when they would self-describe, yes, I am burned out. And that has reliable overlap with more extensive burnout measures.
I know the ICD-9 specifically says that burnout is due to workplace conditions. And yet we know that there are lots of circumstances that foster burnout. We had Debbie Sorensen on a while back, who wrote a wonderful book on burnout. And in it, she talks about parental burnout.
Yes.
Yeah. And so there are a lot of ways to get burned out, and, particularly as a caregiver. So it's not just the workplace.
Absolutely. I hear you. And I think that is something that, I mean, both I have experienced myself and I hear frequently from professionals on the ground, regardless of, medical professionals, mental health professionals, first responders. One of the themes that I hear come up a lot is I knew I was burned out when it wasn't domain specific or just one piece of my life. It felt like it was bleeding into everything. And I have this distinct memory of when I was deep in my second round of being incredibly burnout. One of the signs for me was that every time my family and I, at that time, we'd do a family movie night every Friday. And every Friday, I could not sit down without falling asleep. And it was a joke. It kind of breaks my heart now to think of it as a joke because it was
What kind of movies were you choosing?
All movies, comedies and cartoons and like great like stunt filled action movies. But my body was exhausted and it was telling me in all the ways it could. So to your point, yes, there are so many things that can cause burnout, and we see it in so many settings, not just work.
Are certain people more prone to it, do you think? Are some of us more vulnerable?
That's a great question. What I know the literature, and then, here's what the literature says, and then what also I've seen professionally. So what the literature says is the risk factors for burnout are those people who are in incredibly imbalanced systems. So systems that are underfunded, where there are very low staff to patient ratios, where they are exposed to a lot of stress, violence, trauma. So you'll see, right? I kind of adjusted the question slightly because one of the big headlines, both of the book and generally I think what we are learning about burnout is there are so many system level issues that fuel the development of burnout. And happily, I think it is an uncommon but still present theme that sometimes workplaces will talk about building individual resilience. And I think that can be a highly unhelpful frame, because the metaphor I frequently use is we would never put cucumbers in a jar of pickling juice and tell them to build their resilience so they don't become pickles. And yet, sometimes we say to individuals, just build your resilience. Please know, I'm aware. I wrote a book that talks about breathing exercises, and breathing exercises are absolutely handed as one of the things to quote unquote build up your capacity to prevent burnout. So the headline is, what the literature tells us is there are many system and contextual things that impact the development of burnout. People who, because of sexist, racist, and imbalanced systems, have much more stress in their life generally, are more vulnerable to burnout. We also know one of the things I was really struck by, because I've been doing a lot of work with medical professionals this year, is the literature since COVID shows the early chapter of when you're a brand new professional is a unique place of vulnerability for burnout, which was really interesting because that's what I was seeing among my clients, my colleagues, and my friends, is that my best friend and I used to talk about it when we were newly graduated as the PhD voice that we had learned that was actually incredibly critical and hostile. And my PhD voice frequently says to me, well, if you were a better therapist, they would all be cured in 12 sessions. It's too bad that you obviously aren't as skilled as you could be. I mean, that. So happily now I have enough experience that doesn't hit the same way it used to. But early in my career and early in many people's careers, they don't have the experience yet. They think everyone else has it figured out, but not them. No.
Well, that's one of our themes for this podcast, is we're always comparing our insides to other people's outsides.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I know the literature does point to some correlates of burnout along the lines of personal characteristics, like early career is one of them. Having children under the age of 5 is a risk factor for burnout. A certain personality characteristics like neuroticism, being having a poor social life, things like that. But that's more of a systemic issue too, I guess. There's been a debate since the beginning of talking about burnout, Maslach and all these people, about is it systemic or is it individual characteristics? And I think we're moving in the direction of it's systemic, and including to the point that you were making about helping people, with their resilience, is just like saying, okay, now get back in there.
Yeah, totally.
And when we say, I'm listening and thinking, how broad do we go? Like, how big is the system? We can think of the system within sort of organizations as problematic. If we think about some, you're talking about hospitals and certainly corporates. I mean, there's a real squeeze at the moment. Workforces are working at a skeletal level. Too few people to do too big jobs. But do we think of it systemically? Because it seems to be a bit of an epidemic. Like, the overwhelm is everywhere. Like, parents are overwhelmed, students are overwhelmed. We're overwhelmed at work. We're overwhelmed as carers for older adults. Like, how far do we go? Like, when we think about systemic, why are we all so overwhelmed? Who's not overwhelmed at the moment?
Right. Great question. Well, I think that, and this is my personal observation, is that I think there are cultural differences in terms of, again, to your question of, all right, how big? What are the layers of system, right? If we think about Bronfenbrenner's like multiple levels of influence, one of the things, as a personal example, one of the things I was really struck by and needed to learn to do differently, coming from the United States to New Zealand. In the United States, a lot of my identity was my professional work. I continue to take, of course, a lot of pride in it, but also spent a lot of time and effort there. And it was a common practice that when I was meeting new people, regardless of whether it was a coffee shop or a playground or a airplane or my office, one of the first questions would be, what do you do for a living? That was culturally, in the microcultures in the United States that I was part of, that was important. That was an important piece. And I would contrast that with my experience within some of the different cultures in New Zealand. That is seen as one facet of a much broader identity of you. And I don't want to overstate it, but I learn not to ask people what they do because it's not, if you're meeting them socially, that's a little bit not relevant. And sometimes the conversations that I have had leading from what are you spending your time? What did you do this weekend? What do you love? Leads to much more richer and fascinating conversations as opposed to I do, this little piece of working at the bank. So that is maybe a long answer to, I think there are some cultural influences too about what is important and how we define success. And when part of our definition of success is financial, is professional performance, is based on kind of faster, more, I mean, that intersects really strongly with a moment in time where there are many technological tools that are fueling an idea that we can go faster and do more, and that equals success. When I think I was just Cal Newport, who is just an exceptional writer and computer scientist and thinker around deep work and how we build rich lives within a context of evolving technology. His most recent essay was reporting on some data that he was illustrating these multiple moments in time across the last 50 years where there's been a technological innovation like the fax machine, like email, like AI. And at each of those moments, the prediction was, we're going to have so much more free time. We're going to be so efficient. Just think about how much more we can accomplish. And what we find, and maybe this is a piece of, humans being humans, is what we find is we actually end up simply doing a lot more work and the expectations continue to go higher and higher and higher. Sweet humans.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these are the ironies of, unintended consequences. When computers came out in offices, they said, paper will be a thing of the past. But it actually generated more paper because people could now print out a draft of something and look at it and throw it away and print out another draft. And so all of a sudden, offices started using even more paper.
Amazing.
I remember when the BlackBerry came out. Gosh, that's a long time ago. And people were very excited about having a BlackBerry and how that would create all this sort of flexibility around work. And definitely the idea was that with those whom I was working, that, that would give them more freedom. But it actually became, work became a 24-hour job because you could do it whenever, wherever.
You could be found.
You could be found.
I remember when pages came out. I'm that old. And
pagers.
You just, you couldn't escape. But I think the other thing along with technology is just the amount of information that we're exposed to or can access. And, my feeling of overwhelm these days has to do with geopolitics and this stuff that I guess I should know about, but I can't control. And the helplessness, I think, really contributes to, the stress that a lot of us are feeling right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I talk about that a little more kind of in the book. That is one of the facets that I think is definitely resonates in my own life. Having so much exposure to this kind of like perfect storm of pain, which is I cannot influence it. I am feeling impacted by it because I'm human, and there are technology can flood us constantly. We always have. Sometimes I think about kind of our nervous system and our brain is that is still adjusting on the timescale of evolution, but the world outside of ourselves is iterating on just an incredibly different time span. So of course, we're overwhelmed. Of course we are.
Yeah. I mean, our brains are 10,000 BC issue. When people lived and died within the same 20-mile radius, and you got up when it was light and you went to bed when it was dark, and you whittled, the spear points during the day.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. I'm constantly reminding myself, what do I have control over?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
That's the first thing I think of when I get up in the morning is, okay, because I immediately start thinking about all this stuff, my young adult son who, is looking for a job, this work environment, everything that's going on in the world. And I just have to take a few deep breaths and remind myself, again, what do I have control over? What do I have control over?
Absolutely. Chris, do you mind if I make an observation of that? So I know we will get there more formally, but the takeaway of Start Here, a practical guide for the overwhelmed, is there is a 3-step method. And this really is a distillation of a century of science: soothe, transcend, and move. And you just so beautifully demonstrated. And my guess is there's many listeners and many readers who have their own version of this. I mean, you take a breath, right? You soothe yourself. Then you transcend that kind of potentially like fused or upset thought and say, all right, what can I control? And then my guess is you do something with your day. I mean, it's just a lovely example of there's so many ways that we find what works for us, especially if we, have a lot of training, value self-reflection and growth. I just thought it was, just a lovely example.
Well, that's a good segue then. Let's unpack those 3 things.
All right. Would you like me to talk in a little more detail about each of them?
Absolutely.
That sound good? Okay, beautiful. All righty. So Start Here is intended to be a cookbook. It is in the very first thing I say is that, of course, our science is limited. It just is. And my wish for every single reader is that our science was extensive and comprehensive and perfect. I wish it was, tuned to their unique situation and their unique personality profile and the moment in time they were in. And of course it's not. But each of us have a lot of self-knowledge about what works for us or not. So the initial caveat is only take what is useful. None of these suggestions are intended to be used as weapons or as like wagging fingers, like you should do this, you should do this. It really is, here's the tasting platter, see what works for you. So generally I suggest a 3-step plan. Soothe, so soothe your body, and then transcend the present moment. So one example of soothing is long, deep breaths. Another evidence-based way to soothe yourself is to put your forehead into a sink of cold water. I tell a story. This initiates the diver's reflex, which immediately reduces your breathing rate and your heart rate. For practitioners of dialectical behavior therapy, it's frequently described as the temperature among the tip skills.
So this is preparing your body to drown.
No. It is actually the diver's reflex is preparing your body to conserve energy so you can save yourself or
when you're
someone
drowning,
else can save you. Yeah. You're submerged in some way.
Yeah.
And hopefully able not to drown. Yes. Yeah. It's not like a death right, though. It's actually trying to kind of prepare you for getting better.
Just to sink and not like some larger body that could consume you. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
But anyway, please continue. Sorry.
I felt that was hysterical. No, it's brilliant. I used to use it when I was working with people with, in the DBT program. I mean, it really does jolt you And it's hard to be overwhelmed in that moment. Like it just sort of zooms your attention in. I didn't know it had such a physiological piece. I thought it was more about sort of redirecting attention to the sensations on your face, or, we used to have very, very cold water bottles that they used to splash in their face. Like it was quite
Oh,
um,
nice.
yeah. So I didn't know it had a physiological, so it was really interesting in your book. And I've actually, since reading your book, I brought it back into my clinical room. So I've got
Oh,
people
love that.
dunking their face in icy water now.
I'm
Yeah,
sure
and
they're thrilled about that. They
I'm
probably
sure
feel
they
so
are.
grateful.
This is great. Thanks a lot, Emma. And it's hot here. So like Singapore's super hot. So it's not as big a contrast perhaps as if you're in a really cold climate, but it's effective.
Beautiful. Oh, I love it. So those are two examples of kind of how we soothe ourselves through breathing or through dunking our head in ice water. And then transcend. So transcend broadly means, all right, now that your body is soothed, see if you can kind of float above any details that are keeping you stuck and see the lay of the land. And then there's a variety of suggestions within Transcend, including I generally do not use the term acceptance because sometimes people, when the word acceptance is used, it can be heard as submission, which is confusing. And of course, understandably, people can sometimes have a reaction. So instead, I introduce the term clear seeing in the book. Can we see things as they are? It is incredibly tempting to see things as we wish they would be, or focus on the one aspect that we're really interested in controlling. But so one tactic for transcending is clear seeing the whole situation. We can also use self-compassion as a really common and well researched technique. I want to shout out to Catherine Hall, who is the illustrator of the book, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it here. She did this beautiful illustration of someone climbing up a rock face. And the standard tender self-compassion script has 3 components or phrases. And so she has this image of a person kind of climbing up the rock face and going to, so an acknowledgement of, yeah, this hurts. This is painful. And then, oh, this is so human. Everybody has felt this way at some point. And finally, a phrase of nurturing or encouragement. We can do this. I'm right here. We can do this together. So that's another example of transcending. And then moving is in this specific moment in time, the only place where we have agency and impact. What is the one small step we would like to move forward? And I know I'm talking to 2 people who do a lot of acceptance and commitment work. So one of the things that I highlight in the book is how can that movement be aligned with our broader values?
And just connecting with values is a component of transcending.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Yeah, it helps kind of expand our awareness past the like, what's a great example of sometimes when we're feeling really overwhelmed, we can get focused on the thing directly in front of us and disconnected with, wait, is this a priority for me? And what are the values that are most important to me for showing up? Is it to solve it, or to not be a bother, or to be quiet, or is it to demonstrate strength or compassion or love or presence?
Yeah, I illustrate that with a cardboard roll from a roll of paper towels, and how we get into this narrow view of, because it's a threat response. We're overwhelmed. We're going into threat mode, and so we're focused on the threat, which is adapted if there is a threat, or if it's just the world is going to hell. And that narrow view, as useful as it might be in some circumstances, in a lot of circumstances, is not very adaptable. You do have to expand that to go, okay, what are my options here? Where should I be, putting my attention spotlight?
I think what's really helpful too is when we have these, I think your book is brilliant. And I recognize that I, myself, and many of my clients, and, I think everybody in this room have been at times overwhelmed and haven't used the skills. Because when we are, yes, when we're overwhelmed, it's not something that comes to mind. When we're overwhelmed, we're looking at doing more of the same. So perhaps I've got 500 things on my to-do list. And I then put yet another thing on my to-do list, which is to do my to-do list. It's just, it can be a very stuck place.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we remind ourselves that that's not working? I know it seems so obvious when you're calm and collected as we are now. But, I think all of us in this room have been burnt out. So we are the people who help those that are burnt out, and yet we've tripped up maybe more than once. How do we remember some of these cues? What is it, something that can remind us to use the soothe, for example, if we start with the soothe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The two things. So I will give my answer, but I really would love to hear from both of you as well, because there's a ton of experience and wisdom in this room around, all right, how do we do these hard things that are, we know, but we're also incredibly human, and it's so easy to forget in the moment. So what I've seen be useful and works for me is, one, a lot of practice when I'm not overwhelmed. So the reality is that when I am exercising regularly, when I am sleeping consistently, when I have a more regular kind of present-centered or mindfulness practice, when that is in more autopilot generally, it becomes more obvious to me when I feel off. And
nice.
So that is for me, one of the answers. Also doing either, therapy, coaching, mentoring, or journaling work around what are the signs. So for example, for me, over the last few years, I've just been, obviously, right? I'm talking so much about burnout. It also felt really important for me to understand what are the warning signs for myself. And the first, because it's just easy. It's easier for me to recognize my thoughts. That's kind of, if we think about all the internal sensations, that is what is my easier go-to. So for me, understanding that when I think, if I have the thoughts, I am the worst therapist in the world, I could be running my husband's life better than he is. These are just silliness. These are silliness, and actually kind of disrespectful both to my husband and to myself. I am going to throw this computer out the window. Like, those are thoughts that are, for me, real signs that, oh, sweet pea, something's happening here. Your mind is no longer trustworthy. And then my more recent work has been, all right, coming into, what are the physical signs? I'm starting to feel shame. What are my latest kind of fun hobby is, what are some of the health measures or Fitbit measures that any health tracker, what are the health tracker measures that are indicating to me that I'm starting to that I'm against the guardrails or the bumpers, and it's going to be useful for me to self-correct. But what about you two?
I think for me, I notice it in my body. I get very tight. I can feel like it's squeezing. Yeah, it's like my whole body sort of seems to be more tighter and critical, demanding of myself and others. Anybody who's in my sort of close proximity, be warned. I notice that. And so that's a sign that usually I need to slow down. I need to go
Yeah.
quiet. I need to consistent with my exercise and sleep. But it's things like saying no to more, even to the kids, just saying no, I'm not available. I can't do, like, even this morning, we have our conversation and I'm going straight off to another podcast that I'm been invited, and I know I've got a small window, and inside of me, I wanted to take the kids to school because I love doing that. But I know what I would have been like had I done that. So I said to them, you know what, guys, it's going to be too tight for me. And of course, they were disappointed. But I had such clarity. I gave myself permission for that to be okay, that they could be disappointed, because actually, I don't want to feel all tight and flustered. It doesn't feel good. And then the work that is meaningful, which is having these conversations, doesn't feel as good either. So that felt much better. And actually, they were quite happy when I did it in a very calm, collected way versus, you guys are just going to have to jump on a taxi.
Yes.
It's just what's going to
Yes.
happen today, right? Which wouldn't have been so nice for anybody. But I had enough time to sort of take stock. Like, this isn't feeling great. Can I give myself permission? That sort of self-compassion. I joke with the kids that I'm not an octopus. There's only one of me. We have to make this work. I think for me, those are my signs. So yeah, maybe there was a bit of soothing and a bit of transcending and definitely moving.
That's such a lovely example of when we're overwhelmed, the drive can be do more, go faster, take it on, say yes. And the paradox is that the answer and the gift both to yourself and to them, because what modeling of we're just gonna go slow and steady. And there's time for this much. We're going to enjoy the joy of missing out. And we have space for this, and we don't need to cram more.
I'm so delighted I did that. But yes, thank you. That's such a nice way. The joy of doing less. Yeah. Joy of missing out. Somebody said, is it the joy of missing out? Somebody called it the other day.
Yeah, the JOMO. That's right.
The JOMO. Yeah.
That's right.
I'm going to adopt that. For me, I think I have sort of high risk times that I'm aware of. So like first thing in the morning when I get up, it's often like, ugh, because I think about all the stuff we wake up to the clock radio, to NPR, and we get to hear all about the horrible things that are going on in the world. It's nice to be well informed, but I'm waking up going, oh man, I have to be mindful of that. But I have a pretty good routine in the morning that includes coming down here, doing my yoga and meditation, exercise, and that keeps me going. If I miss that for a day or two in a row, which is rare, but when it happens, I can really feel it. So I retired from my clinical practice a few years ago, and I was pretty burned out. And my big component was the exhaustion piece. I was just tired. So I keep my eye on that. One of my favorite authors is a gentleman named David White, who's as well as a corporate consultant, talks about burnout, keeping your soul alive in the corporate world, that sort of thing. And in one of his books, he quotes a monk where he and the monk are talking about exhaustion. And the monk says, the antidote to exhaustion is not rest, it's wholeheartedness. And I think about that. And I don't think about wholeheartedness as like, I'm going to take on more. I think of it as just coming to whatever you're doing with your whole heart. And, and that could be, making coffee in the morning or making my wife her tea in the morning. And, this, you can call it mindfulness practice, whatever it may be, but it's that focus on, being really present to what I'm doing, which allows some of that other stuff to just sort of fade into the background a little bit.
Beautifully said. I love that. Building on that, what comes up for me as you say wholeheartedness is this Joseph Goldstein instruction at some point, kind of noting how there is no effort in presence. Like if we kind of practice just listening, that we can do that almost effortlessly. And I will sometimes, I think parenting just involves periods of sleep deprivation. And I have these distinct memories of kind of being with a client and feeling like, oh, it's so important to me to show up fully for this person. Like this is, this is their hour. And my body's so deeply exhausted. I found a lot of comfort in that instruction that presence doesn't need to be effortful. It feels like that. It may just be me that feels like that's a connection to wholeheartedness. It's this fullness of, I am here with you. Maybe not surprisingly, that feels much more useful and aligned than any kind of like hustle or multitasking or trying to pretend I wasn't feeling tired, for example. Thank you for bringing in that wholeheartedness.
Well, and then, the irony is that when we're present, we actually are more efficient, can get more done than, if we're, there's the saying, be lazy, do it right the first time.
Oh, I never heard that. That's amazing. That's beautiful. We have a family phrase of slow is steady, steady is fast.
Right. I think the Navy SEALs talk about that.
Yeah.
I think they say slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So, in the interest of time, some final thoughts, things that we might leave our beautiful listeners with.
I think my final thoughts are, if you are feeling overwhelmed, you are not alone. Of course. All of us have been there, are there, will be there again. You're in really good company. This is challenging. And if you're listening to this podcast, if you're making this podcast, that tells me that you really value growth and access to thoughtful, science-based ways to learn. And that is such a rich journey. And kudos to you.
And I was remembering in part of your book around the Transcend, there's all this wonderful research on the value of self-compassion. How important it is to recognize that we got here because this is what humans do incredibly well, which is to sort of work really hard and create an incredible world where we can now cure, diseases, where people live longer. But the sort of side effect of all of that is overwhelm. I think that sort of self-compassion where you remind the readers and you remind us all that, being kind goes a long way to help us feel better. Being kind to ourselves really is worth it. And because we are going to get overwhelmed, life is overwhelming. Humans have a tendency to get ourselves into these sort of very tight spots. And, that kindness that we can give ourselves and others is very powerful. It's not a cop-out. It's research-based. It's effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Slowly.
Slowly. Dr. Kerry Makin-Byrd, thank you so much. This has been delightful.
Thank you. It was my
pleasure. I think it's going to be very interesting and useful and important to our listeners. So,
yeah. And we'll share all about your work.
Which will have your books, your website.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Thank you.